My name is Lisa, and 3 months ago, I stood in my parents' living room, watching my sister Emma's perfect world crumble as I revealed the most devastating secret about her fiancé that would change our family forever. What I'm about to tell you will shock you, but more importantly, it will show you how sometimes the people we trust most are hiding the darkest truths. Let me take you back to where this all began, because to understand the magnitude of what happened that night, you need to know who we were before everything fell apart. I've always been the responsible one in the Mitchell family. At 28, I work as a financial analyst in downtown Chicago, living in a modest apartment that I've carefully decorated with second-hand furniture and plants I've managed to keep alive for more than 6 months. My sister Emma, 2 years younger, has always been the golden child. She's the one with the marketing degree from Northwestern, the designer wardrobe, and the seemingly perfect life that my parents never stopped praising. Growing up, Emma could do no wrong. When she got a C in calculus, it was because the teacher didn't understand her learning style. When I got a C in anything, it was because I wasn't applying myself. When Emma forgot to do chores, she was too busy with important social activities. When I forgot, I was being irresponsible. The pattern was so consistent that I stopped expecting anything different, but I loved my sister despite everything. She had this infectious laugh and a way of making even the most mundane activities feel like adventures. When we were kids, she'd convince me to build blanket forts in the living room and tell elaborate stories about the kingdoms we ruled together. Those moments felt real in a way that nothing else in our family did. As adults, we'd grown closer. Emma would call me when she had relationship problems, career stress, or just needed someone to listen. I was her go-to person for advice, her emotional support system. She trusted me with her secrets, her fears, her dreams. I thought I knew everything about her life. That's why I was genuinely happy when she started dating Marcus Hoffman 8 months ago. Marcus was everything our parents had always wanted for Emma: successful, charming, from a good family. He was a real estate developer with his own company, drove a BMW, and had the kind of confident smile that made people trust him instantly. The first time Emma brought Marcus to a family dinner, he won everyone over immediately. He complimented my mother's cooking, discussed investment strategies with my father, and even asked me thoughtful questions about my work. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know our family, not just impressing them. Marcus was handsome in that clean-cut, all-American way: dark hair, green eyes, perfectly fitted suits. He looked like he'd stepped out of a catalog for successful young professionals. When he looked at Emma, his face would light up like she was the most amazing thing he'd ever seen. They seemed genuinely happy together. Within 3 months, they were talking about marriage. Within 6 months, Marcus was practically living at Emma's apartment. My parents were thrilled. Here was proof that their beautiful, talented daughter was going to have the perfect life they'd always envisioned for her. I was happy for Emma, but something nagged at me. It wasn't jealousy, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't sometimes wonder why I couldn't seem to find someone who looked at me the way Marcus looked at her. It was more subtle than that. Little inconsistencies in Marcus's stories about his past. The way he'd change the subject whenever anyone asked about his family beyond surface-level details. How he never seemed to have any close male friends despite being so charming and successful. But I pushed those thoughts aside. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe I'd been single for so long that I'd forgotten what a healthy relationship looked like. Emma was glowing with happiness, and that's all that should have mattered. The engagement happened on a Saturday in early September. Marcus had planned this elaborate proposal at Navy Pier, complete with a photographer hiding in the crowd and Emma's favorite flowers waiting at a nearby restaurant. The ring was stunning, a 2-carat diamond in a platinum setting that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. Emma called me immediately afterward, crying with joy, barely able to form coherent sentences. "Lisa, oh my God, Lisa, he proposed. I'm engaged. I can't believe this is real." I was at home, grading some financial reports for Monday's presentation, when my phone rang. Hearing Emma's happiness made my chest tight with emotion. This was my little sister, and she sounded like the happiest person in the world. "Tell me everything," I said, settling back into my couch with a cup of tea. Emma described every detail. How Marcus had gotten down on one knee right as the sun was setting over Lake Michigan, how he'd given this beautiful speech about wanting to spend the rest of his life making her happy, how the ring fit perfectly because he'd somehow figured out her size without her knowing. "Lisa, I need you to be my maid of honor," Emma said. I can't imagine doing this without you. You've always been there for me through everything. Will you please say yes? Of course I said yes. Despite all the years of feeling like the less favored daughter, Emma was still my sister, and this was one of the most important moments of her life. I wanted to be part of it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of wedding planning. Emma threw herself into it with the kind of intensity she brought to everything she cared about. She had spreadsheets for vendors, Pinterest boards for decorations, and a detailed timeline that mapped out every aspect of the planning process. I helped whenever I could. We spent weekends visiting venues, tasting cakes, looking at flowers. Emma had decided on a spring wedding, which gave us about 7 months to plan everything. It was ambitious, but Emma thrived on ambitious projects. Marcus was involved but not obsessive about the details. He cared about the big picture: good food, good music, a beautiful venue where Emma would feel like a princess. He seemed content to let her make most of the aesthetic decisions while he handled the logistics and budget. This should have been a happy time. Emma was planning her dream wedding, our parents were over the moon, and Marcus seemed like the perfect future son-in-law. But those nagging doubts about Marcus kept growing stronger. It started with small things. Marcus claimed to have gone to University of Michigan for business school, but when I mentioned a professor I knew there, he seemed confused and quickly changed the subject. He said he'd grown up in Grand Rapids, but when my father started talking about a business contact he had there, Marcus's knowledge of the area seemed surprisingly limited. The more I paid attention, the more these little inconsistencies added up. Marcus had supposedly played tennis in college, but when Emma suggested they play doubles with another couple, he suddenly had a shoulder injury that prevented him from playing. He claimed to have a close relationship with his parents, but Emma had never met them, and they hadn't been involved in any aspect of the engagement or wedding planning. When I asked Emma about meeting Marcus's family, she got a strange look on her face. "They're very private people," she said. "Marcus says they're old-fashioned and prefer to keep family matters within the family. We'll meet them at the wedding." That didn't sit right with me. What kind of parents wouldn't want to meet their son's fiancé? What kind of family was too private to be involved in wedding planning but would show up to the actual ceremony? I tried to push my concerns aside. Maybe Marcus just came from a different kind of family than ours. Maybe I was being overly suspicious, but the feeling that something was wrong kept growing stronger. The turning point came 6 weeks after the engagement, on a Thursday evening in mid-October. I was leaving my office later than usual, around 8 p.m., when I decided to stop by Emma's apartment to drop off some wedding magazines I'd picked up for her. She'd mentioned wanting to look at different ideas for centerpieces. Emma's apartment building was in Lincoln Park, a trendy area with tree-lined streets and restored brownstones. I'd been there dozens of times, but that night felt different somehow. The October air was crisp, and the streetlights cast long shadows that seemed more ominous than usual. I used the key Emma had given me months ago and quietly let myself into her apartment. The lights were off in the main living area, but I could hear voices coming from the bedroom. Emma and Marcus were having what sounded like an intense conversation. I should have announced myself immediately. I should have called out that I was there and given them privacy. But something in the tone of their voices made me pause. They weren't talking like a happy couple discussing wedding plans. There was tension, anger, something that made my stomach clench with worry. I found myself standing in Emma's hallway, barely breathing, trying to make out what they were saying. Marcus's voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Harder, colder. Gone was the charming warmth that had won over my family. This was a voice I didn't recognize. "You need to stop asking so many questions," Marcus was saying. "I've told you everything you need to know. But I don't understand why I can't meet them before the wedding," Emma replied. Her voice was smaller than usual, uncertain in a way that made my protective instincts flare. "Marcus, I'm going to be their daughter-in-law. Don't you think it's strange that we've been engaged for 6 weeks and I haven't even spoken to them on the phone? My family doesn't work that way, Emma. I've explained this." "What you've explained doesn't make sense," Emma said, and I could hear her getting braver, pushing back in a way that made me proud of her. "Every family I know wants to be involved in their children's weddings. Your parents haven't even called to congratulate me. Your sister hasn't responded to any of my messages on social media. It's like they don't know I exist." There was a long pause. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was so quiet I had to strain to hear him. "Maybe they don't." The words hung in the air like a physical thing. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid they'd hear it. "What do you mean?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Another pause. Then Marcus laughed, but it wasn't the warm, engaging laugh I'd heard at family dinners. This laugh was bitter, almost cruel. I mean, maybe my family doesn't know about you because there are things about my life that are more complicated than you understand. Marcus, you're scaring me. You should be scared, Emma. You should be very careful about how much you push me on this. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. I felt ice forming in my stomach. This wasn't the man who'd charmed my parents, who'd seemed so devoted to my sister. This was someone else entirely. I heard movement from the bedroom, footsteps approaching the door. Panic flooded through me. If Marcus found me here, listening to their private conversation, there was no telling how he'd react. And after what I'd just heard, I was genuinely afraid of what he might do. I quickly and quietly made my way back to the front door, slipping out as silently as I'd entered. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely get the key back into my purse. I sat in my car outside Emma's building for 20 minutes, trying to process what I'd heard. Marcus had threatened my sister. He'd implied that there were significant things about his life that he was hiding from her. The warmth and charm he'd shown our family was clearly an act. But what was he hiding? And more importantly, how could I protect Emma without her thinking I was just being a jealous, overprotective sister who couldn't stand to see her happy? I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with possibilities. Was Marcus married? Did he have a criminal background? Was he involved in something illegal? The scenarios my imagination conjured up got progressively worse. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Marcus's voice. You should be scared, Emma. The threat was so clear, so menacing. My little sister, who collected vintage teacups and cried at commercials with puppies, was engaged to someone who could speak to her that way. The next morning, I called Emma to check on her. I tried to keep my voice casual, normal. Hey, Em, how are you doing? Everything okay? There was a pause before she answered, just long enough to confirm that something was definitely wrong. I'm fine, Lisa, just tired. Wedding planning is more stressful than I expected. Her voice sounded strained, like she'd been crying or hadn't slept well either. Do you want to talk about it? Maybe grab lunch today and go over some of the vendor options? I can't today. Marcus and I have some things to figure out. Maybe this weekend? After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, trying to decide what to do. I could confront Emma directly, but she'd want to know how I'd overheard their conversation, and then she'd know I'd essentially been eavesdropping. I could talk to my parents, but they were so thrilled about the engagement that they'd probably dismiss my concerns as wedding-related stress. Or I could try to find out more about Marcus myself. I'd never done anything like what I was about to do. I'd never investigated someone, never gone looking for secrets. But something about Marcus's threat to Emma had awakened a protective instinct I didn't know I possessed. If my sister was in danger, I needed to know. I started with the basics. Marcus had said he owned a real estate development company called Hoffman Properties. A quick Google search brought up a professional-looking website with Marcus's photo and a description of various projects the company had supposedly completed. But when I dug deeper, things started to fall apart quickly. The projects listed on the website were real, but they'd been completed by other companies. The office address listed for Hoffman Properties was a generic business center that rented temporary office space by the month. I called the number on the website. A generic voicemail system answered, the kind you get with basic phone service packages. No company name, no professional greeting, just please leave a message and your call will be returned. My hands were trembling as I hung up. Marcus's business was fake, complete fiction, which meant everything else about him was probably fake too. I spent the next several hours diving deeper into Marcus Hoffman's supposed background. The University of Michigan Business School had no record of anyone by that name in their alumni database for the years Marcus would have attended. The address he'd given Emma for his apartment was real, but when I looked up the property records, it was owned by someone else entirely. With each piece of evidence I found, the picture became clearer and more terrifying. Marcus Hoffman, as Emma knew him, didn't exist. The man she was planning to marry had constructed an elaborate false identity, and I had no idea why. I needed help. This was beyond anything I could handle alone. I called my college roommate Sarah, who'd gone on to become an attorney specializing in white-collar crime. If anyone would know how to investigate someone safely and legally, it would be her. Sarah, I need your help with something, and I need you to keep this completely confidential, I said when she answered. What's going on, Lisa? You sound terrified. I told her everything. The inconsistencies I'd noticed, the conversation I'd overheard, the fake business and false background information. Sarah listened without interrupting, and I could hear her taking notes. "Lisa, this sounds like your sister might be involved with someone who's running some kind of long-term con," Sarah said when I finished. "The level of deception you're describing suggests this isn't amateur hour. This is someone who's done this before." My stomach dropped. What kind of con? Could be financial. He gets engaged to women from well-off families, gains their trust, gets access to their money or their family's money, then disappears. Could be identity theft. He's collecting information about your sister and your family for some kind of fraud scheme, or it could be something else entirely. What do I do? Emma won't believe me without proof, and I don't know how to get proof without doing something illegal. "Leave that to me," Sarah said. "I have contacts who specialize in this kind of investigation. Give me everything you have on Marcus, and let me make some calls." "But Lisa, if this is what I think it is, your sister could be in real danger, not just financially, but physically." The word physically hit me like a punch to the chest. I thought again of Marcus's voice that night. "You should be scared, Emma." "How long will it take?" I asked. "Give me a week, maybe less if I'm right about what this is." After I hung up with Sarah, I realized I was faced with the most difficult week of my life. I had to act normal around Emma and my family, while knowing that the man they all loved and trusted might be a dangerous criminal. I had to watch Emma continue planning her wedding to someone who was lying about everything while I waited for proof that would devastate her. I saw Emma twice that week. The first time was at a family dinner on Sunday, where Marcus was his usual charming self. He complimented my mother's pot roast, discussed the Bears' season with my father, and was affectionate and attentive with Emma. Watching him, knowing what I knew, was surreal. His performance was flawless, but I noticed things I'd missed before. How he deflected any question that required specific details about his past. How his stories about his supposed childhood in Grand Rapids were vague and generic. How he never mentioned specific friends, former classmates, or personal anecdotes that would be natural for someone to share. Most unsettling was how he looked at Emma when he thought no one else was paying attention. The adoring expression he wore for everyone else would slip, and underneath was something calculating, almost predatory. It made my skin crawl. The second time I saw Emma was Wednesday evening, when she asked me to come with her to look at wedding dresses. It should have been one of those special sister moments, but I felt like I was living in a nightmare. Emma tried on dress after dress, each one more beautiful than the last. She looked radiant, glowing with the happiness of a woman who believed she was about to marry the love of her life. The saleswoman kept gushing about how beautiful Emma looked, how lucky Marcus was, how perfect their wedding was going to be. I smiled and nodded and said all the right things, but inside I was screaming. How was I going to tell my sister that the man she loved, the man she was planning to spend her life with, was lying about everything? "Lisa, are you okay?" Emma asked as we were leaving the bridal shop. "You seem distracted." "Just work stress," I lied. "Big presentation coming up." Emma squeezed my hand. "You work too hard. After the wedding, when things settle down, we should plan a sister's trip somewhere, maybe wine country." The casual assumption that there would be a wedding, that her life would continue on its current perfect trajectory, nearly broke my heart. "That sounds wonderful, Em." Friday afternoon, Sarah called. "Lisa, you need to sit down for this." I was at work, but I stepped into an empty conference room and closed the door. "What did you find?" "Marcus Hoffman doesn't exist. The name is an alias. My contact ran his photo through facial recognition software connected to law enforcement databases. His real name is Michael Hartford, and he's wanted in 3 states for fraud, embezzlement, and bigamy." The room seemed to spin around me. "Bigamy? He's done this before, Lisa, multiple times. The pattern is always the same. He creates a false identity, targets women from middle-class families with some assets, gets engaged, then systematically drains their bank accounts and disappears. Sometimes he actually goes through with fake marriages before he vanishes." Oh my God, Emma, there's more. In 2 of the previous cases, when the women started getting suspicious or asking too many questions, they were physically assaulted. One woman ended up in the hospital with a broken jaw and 3 cracked ribs. Michael Hartford is not just a con artist, Lisa. He's dangerous. I was having trouble breathing. My sister was living with a man who had beaten other women, who was planning to steal everything she had, who might hurt her if she got too close to the truth. What do I do? You need to go to the police with this information. But more importantly, you need to get Emma away from him immediately. Don't wait, don't try to explain everything, just get her out of that apartment and somewhere safe. She won't believe me. She's so happy, Sarah. She thinks she's living a fairy tale. Then you're going to have to shatter that fairy tale to save her life. I called Emma immediately after hanging up with Sarah. Emma, I need you to come to my apartment right now. Don't tell Marcus where you're going, don't pack anything, just get in your car and come here. Lisa, what's wrong? You're scaring me. I'll explain everything when you get here, but Emma, I'm serious. You need to leave that apartment right now. There was a long pause. Marcus is here. He's making dinner. We were going to watch a movie and go over some wedding vendor contracts. The normalcy of it was heartbreaking. Here was my sister, planning a cozy evening with the man she loved, while I was trying to tell her that same man was a criminal who might hurt her. Emma, please, trust me. I know this doesn't make sense, but I need you to leave right now. I can't just leave without an explanation, Lisa. Marcus will think something's wrong. Something is wrong. Everything is wrong. Emma, please, just come here and I'll show you everything. I could hear voices in the background, Marcus asking Emma, who was on the phone. I have to go, Lisa. We'll talk tomorrow, okay? She hung up before I could say anything else. I tried calling back immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail, again. Voicemail. Panic flooded through me. Marcus had heard Emma's side of the conversation. He knew something was wrong. If he was as dangerous as Sarah's contact had indicated, Emma was in immediate danger. I grabbed my keys and drove to Emma's apartment faster than I'd ever driven in my life. I called Sarah on the way, told her what had happened, asked her to contact the police and have them meet me there. When I arrived at Emma's building, I could see lights on in her apartment, but everything looked normal from the outside. I used my key to let myself into the building and took the elevator to the 4th floor, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could hear raised voices through Emma's apartment door. I pressed my ear against it, trying to make out what was happening. Marcus was angry, angrier than I'd heard him that night I'd eavesdropped on their conversation. What did your sister want, Emma? What did she say to you? She just wanted me to come over. I don't know why she was being so weird about it. She knows something. I could tell by your reaction on the phone. Knows something about what? Marcus, you're frightening me. Good, you should be frightened. Your sister is poking around in things that are none of her business. I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, Emma crying out as if she'd been grabbed or pushed. I used my key as quietly as possible and slipped into the apartment. The voices were coming from the living room. I could see Marcus holding Emma by the shoulders, his face inches from hers. Emma looked terrified. Let go of me, Emma was saying, her voice shaking. Not until you tell me exactly what your sister said. I stepped into the living room. Let go of her, Michael. Marcus spun around, his grip on Emma tightening. For a moment, his face showed complete shock. Then his expression shifted into something I'd never seen before, pure rage. You, he said, his voice low and menacing. Emma looked confused, glancing between us. Lisa, how did you get in here, and why did you call him Michael? Because that's his real name, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. Emma, everything he's told you is a lie. His name isn't Marcus Hoffman. He doesn't own a real estate company. He never went to University of Michigan. He's a con artist, and he's wanted by the police in 3 states. Emma stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Lisa, what are you talking about? That's crazy. His real name is Michael Hartford, I continued, never taking my eyes off Marcus. Michael. He's done this before, multiple times. He targets women like you, creates fake identities, gets engaged, then steals their money and disappears. That's enough, Michael snarled. His grip on Emma was so tight she winced. Emma, look at his face, I said. Look at how he's holding you. Does this look like someone who loves you? For the first time, doubt flickered across Emma's features. She looked up at Michael, really looked at him, and I could see the moment she realized that the man holding her wasn't the same person who'd been so gentle and loving for the past 8 months. Marcus. Michael. Whoever you are, you're hurting me, Emma said quietly. I'll hurt you a lot worse if your sister doesn't shut her mouth and leave, Michael replied. That was the moment I realized I might have made a terrible mistake. By confronting him directly, I'd put Emma in immediate physical danger. Michael was cornered now, and cornered criminals were unpredictable, but I was committed. There was no going back. I've already called the police, I said. They're on their way. The best thing you can do right now is let Emma go and leave. Michael laughed, but it was the bitter, cruel laugh I'd heard that night in the bedroom. You think I'm just going to walk away? After 8 months of work? After all the time I've invested in this? Invested in what? Emma asked, her voice barely audible. Michael looked down at her with something that might have been pity. In you, sweetheart. In your family. In access to your father's business accounts, your trust fund, your mother's jewelry collection. Did you really think this was about love? Emma's face went completely white. My trust fund? $50,000. Plus whatever I can get from your father's business accounts once we're married and you give me power of attorney to help manage your family's finances. Plus your mother's diamond necklace, which is worth about 20 grand according to your insurance records. How do you know about my insurance records? Michael's smile was chilling. I know everything about you, Emma, everything about your family. I've been collecting information for months. Banking details, social security numbers, investment accounts. Your family made it so easy, always talking about money at dinner, always leaving financial documents lying around. Emma began to shake. You've been stealing from us? Not stealing, planning, though I have to admit, your sister here has made things more complicated than they needed to be. I took a step closer, trying to get within reach of Emma. Let her go, Michael. Take whatever you think you can get and leave. Don't make this worse than it already is. Oh, it's going to get much worse, Michael said. See, the problem is that you know who I am now, and Emma knows who I am, which means you're both liabilities. The threat was clear. I realized with crystal clarity that Michael wasn't planning to just disappear. He was planning to hurt us, maybe kill us, to protect his secret. Emma realized it at the same moment I did. You're going to kill us, she whispered. I'm going to do whatever I have to do to protect myself, Michael replied. This is your fault, Lisa. If you'd minded your own business, everyone could have just lived happily ever after. That's when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, sirens in the distance, getting closer. Michael heard them too. His face went from confident to panicked in an instant. You called the police, he said to me, his voice full of rage. I told you I did. Michael looked around the apartment frantically, like he was searching for an escape route. The sirens were getting louder, maybe only a minute or two away. This isn't over, he said to both of us. Then he shoved Emma so hard she fell onto the couch and ran toward the back of the apartment. I heard the sliding door to the balcony open, then slam shut. Michael was trying to escape down the fire escape. I rushed to Emma, who was sitting on the couch in shock, staring at nothing. Emma, are you okay? Did he hurt you? She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. Lisa, everything he said, was any of it real? I sat down next to her and pulled her into a hug. I don't think so, honey, I'm so sorry. The police arrived 3 minutes later. By then, Michael had managed to get away down the fire escape and disappear into the night. But it didn't matter. Sarah had given them his real identity, his criminal history, his photograph. There was no longer anywhere for Michael Hartford to hide. Emma and I spent 4 hours at the police station that night, giving detailed statements about everything we knew about Michael. Emma had to go through the humiliating process of admitting how completely she'd been fooled, how much personal and family information she'd shared with a criminal. The financial damage wasn't as bad as it could have been. Michael had been planning to wait until after they were married to make his big move. But he had managed to get about $3,000 from Emma's checking account over the course of their relationship, money she'd given him for various supposed emergencies and business expenses. More devastating was the emotional damage. Emma blamed herself for being so naive, so trusting. She was embarrassed that she'd been taken in so completely, ashamed that she'd introduced this dangerous man to our family. How did I not see it? She asked me over and over in the days that followed. How was I so stupid? You weren't stupid, I told her every time. You were in love with someone you thought existed. Michael is a professional con artist. Fooling people is what he does for a living. It took 2 weeks for the police to track down and arrest Michael Hartford. He was found in Detroit, already working on establishing a new identity and targeting a new victim. When they arrested him, he had detailed files on 6 different women he'd been researching as potential marks. Emma attended his arraignment, needing to see for herself that this nightmare was really over. Michael looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, less commanding than he'd been in his expensive suits. When his eyes met Emma's across the courtroom, there was no recognition, no emotion at all. It was like she'd never existed. The trial took place 4 months later. Emma testified about their relationship, the lies he'd told, the money he'd taken. Her testimony was part of a larger case that included evidence from his previous victims in other states. Michael Hartford was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. The judge noted that his pattern of targeting women and the violence he'd used against previous victims made him particularly dangerous. But the real healing for Emma didn't come from seeing Michael punished. It came from the long process of rebuilding her confidence, her ability to trust people, her sense of herself as someone who deserved love and honesty. Emma moved back in with our parents for 2 months after Michael's arrest. She couldn't bear to stay in the apartment where she'd lived with someone who'd been lying to her every single day. She took a leave of absence from work and started seeing a therapist who specialized in helping victims of fraud and manipulation. I spent a lot of that time with Emma, helping her process what had happened, reassuring her that none of it was her fault. We became closer than we'd ever been, bonded by the shared trauma and by Emma's new understanding of how much I'd risked to protect her. "I keep thinking about that phone call," Emma told me one afternoon as we were sitting in our parents' backyard. "When you told me to come to your apartment right away, if I had listened to you." "You couldn't have known," I said. "I barely knew myself, I just had a bad feeling." "It was more than a bad feeling, Lisa. You saved my life." I'm not sure if that's true. Maybe Michael never would have hurt Emma physically. Maybe he would have just taken her money and disappeared, the way he'd done with some of his other victims. But I'm glad we never had to find out. The experience changed our entire family. My parents, who had been so charmed by Michael, were horrified to realize how easily they'd been manipulated. They became much more protective of both Emma and me, much more suspicious of people who seemed too good to be true. Emma eventually went back to work, back to her own apartment, back to dating. But she was more careful now, more aware of red flags, more willing to trust her instincts when something didn't feel right. She met David about a year after Michael's arrest. David was nothing like Michael. Quiet where Michael had been charming, honest about his flaws where Michael had seemed perfect, willing to be patient as Emma worked through her trust issues. David met Emma's family early in their relationship and never tried to rush anything. He answered every question Emma had about his background, introduced her to his friends and family, and never made her feel foolish for being cautious. Emma and David got engaged 2 years later. This time, the engagement was quiet, private, just Emma and David and the people who truly mattered to them. There was no elaborate proposal, no expensive ring, no immediate rush to plan a perfect wedding. I realized that I was so focused on having the perfect fairy tale that I forgot to pay attention to the actual person, Emma told me. David isn't perfect, but he's real. Everything about him is real. Their wedding was small and simple, held in our parents' backyard with about 30 people in attendance. Emma wore a simple dress she'd found at a boutique downtown, nothing like the elaborate gowns she'd tried on for Michael. David cried when he saw her walking down the aisle, and his tears were so obviously genuine that everyone else started crying too. During her maid of honor speech, I talked about how proud I was of Emma's strength, her ability to recover from betrayal and learn to trust again. I talked about how David had proven himself worthy of her love through patience, honesty, and genuine care for her well-being. But mostly, I talked about how sometimes protecting the people we love requires us to shatter their illusions, even when it's the hardest thing we've ever had to do. Emma and David have been married for 3 years now. They have a small house in Evanston, 2 cats, and the kind of quiet, stable relationship that builds over time rather than burning bright and fast. Emma still sees her therapist occasionally, and she's become involved in a support group for fraud victims, helping other women who have been through similar experiences. As for me, the experience taught me to trust my instincts, even when everyone around me thinks I'm wrong. It taught me that sometimes being the responsible one, the one who pays attention to details others miss, is exactly what your family needs. I also learned that love sometimes means being willing to be the bad guy, to be the sister who ruins the fairy tale, if it means keeping the people you care about safe. Michael Hartford was released from prison last year after serving 8 years of his 12-year sentence. Emma got a notification from Victim Services when he was released, and for a few weeks, we were all on edge, worried that he might try to contact her or seek revenge. But Emma had changed too much for Michael to have any power over her anymore. She was no longer the woman who could be charmed by expensive dinners and elaborate proposals. She'd learned to value honesty over charm, substance over surface, reality over fantasy. Michael never contacted her. As far as we know, he disappeared back into whatever underworld he'd emerged from, probably already working on creating a new identity to fool a new victim. Sometimes Emma and I talk about what would have happened if I hadn't overheard that conversation in her bedroom, if I hadn't investigated Michael's background, if I hadn't forced that confrontation. Maybe Emma would have married him, given him access to her finances and our family's trust, and lost everything before realizing who he really was. Or maybe she would have figured it out on her own eventually. Emma is smart, observant, strong. Maybe something else would have tipped her off to his lies. But I'm glad we didn't have to find out. I'm glad I trusted my instincts, even when it meant risking my relationship with my sister. I'm glad I was willing to be seen as the jealous, paranoid sister if it meant protecting Emma from someone who could have destroyed her life. The most important thing I learned from this experience is that sometimes the people who seem too good to be true really are too good to be true. Michael seemed like everything Emma had ever wanted. Successful, charming, devoted to her. But underneath that perfect exterior was someone calculating and dangerous. Real love, the kind Emma has with David now, isn't perfect. It's not a fairy tale. It's built on honesty, trust, shared values, and genuine care for each other's well-being. It's not always exciting or romantic, but it's real and it's safe and it lasts. If you're listening to this and you're in a relationship with someone who seems too perfect, someone whose background doesn't quite add up, someone who deflects questions about their past or their family, please trust your instincts. Please ask questions. Please don't ignore red flags because you want so badly for the fairy tale to be real. And if someone you love is in a relationship that worries you, don't be afraid to speak up. It might cost you your relationship with them temporarily, but it might also save their life. Emma thanks me regularly for what I did, for being willing to risk everything to protect her. But honestly, I don't think I had a choice. When you love someone, when you see them in danger, you do whatever it takes to keep them safe, even if it means shattering their dreams. Even if it means being the sister who ruins the fairy tale. Because sometimes, the fairy tale is really a nightmare in disguise, and the only way to wake someone up is to turn on the lights and show them what's really there.